Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to introduce ourselves, and Charlotte's not here. Her husband had COVID, or has COVID, and so she's quarantining. So just a little bit about us is we're the Sand Mountain Seed Bank. We were formed when two seed-saving friends got together, and we took a look at our seeds, and they're in a couple freezers, a couple refrigerators, and decided there's way more seeds than we could ever grow out in our collective lifetimes. So we decided we had to make a plan and steward these seeds and send them on to the next generation to keep them viable, and so they wouldn't die of old age and be gone forever. We also want to share them and pass them on to the next generation. The first friend involved in this is Charlotte Haygood. She's a fifth generation Alabamian, born in Albertville. She got her start saving flower seeds, passed over the fence by a next door neighbor, which was a custom in the 1950s. Later, living in Birmingham, she was giving family heirloom bean seeds and really felt an obligation to keep saving them, to keep them from going extinct. And the other friend in this equation is me. I grew up on a self-sufficient farm in Ohio. I went to school for forestry. I've been a market gardener for the last 20 years, founding member of ASAN and former farmer cooperative. But both of us are self-taught seed savers. And Charlotte brings a knowledge of gardening and intimate knowledge of specific plants to the forefront. I come from a farming background, so I bring, I don't know if you call it more general, but I bring the ability to grow volume and quantity, and also my desire of feeding people into this equation. And both of us come from these two ends, and we've met in the middle, and we've learned a lot from each other and has inspired each other. So that's kind of who we are. And the name of this session, How and Why of Saving Seeds, we really wanted to change it up a little bit this year because we do a lot on the hows and processing and kind of the nuts and bolts of seed saving, but we're going to have that later. But to begin with, I really want to put the question out there to you. What inspires you to save seeds? What do you want to get out of it? And I want you to kind of keep that in your mind while we're going along here. The bottom line of it is we do it so the seeds don't go extinct, so we can preserve these heirloom and especially regional varieties. They're so well adapted in our local area that have already gotten adaptations and strategies for dealing with the weed and insect pressures here. But that's the practical side. Not only do we not want them to go extinct, but really it's in relation to our ever consolidating world, not only just seed banks, but diversity, all of this stuff. And the lack of also the lack of diversity in our seeds and our food and the condition of our shared survival. We can cite many reasons for the necessity of saving seeds, but does that inspire you to save seeds? What inspired us to save seeds was when Charlotte got those family heirloom beans, and she decided it was her responsibility and obligation to save them so they'll be here for future generations. With me, it was have native heritage, so I was trying to tap into native seeds because I wanted to preserve my food without refrigeration and to save seeds from year to year. So that's kind of what got us into this, and what keeps us inspired is when we got into seed saving, we found out more the politics of it, what Monsanto was trying to do as far as patent infringements, taking farmers to court, and really trying to make it illegal at that time in the late 80s, to make it illegal to even save seeds across the garden gate. That really put a fire under us. So we have the practical and we have the ideological parts of saving seeds. So this is how me and Charlotte came to saving these, and this is where we started in our journey with the seeds. But the reasons we kept saving seeds have to do with these imperative reasons, and the evolution of our own thinking over time has brought us, in the past about 15 years ago, really it brought us together physically, and together we're walking this path together in forming the seed bank, helping to get seeds out there, and really trying to impress upon people that this is important for our shared survival, but also our biodiversity, also access to food, local like lending libraries, or developing new things for climate change, which is one of me and Charlotte's big things now. The answer to the questions that I've posed to you about what excites you, what do you want to get out of seed savings, answer to those questions will guide you in the journey you have with the seeds. This may sound kind of heavy, but really think about the commitment between plants and people that's been happening for tens of thousands of years. Is it responsible to give away our stewardship to those who have no interest in life? Should we take our human place in this journey for the welfare of all by honoring those who came before us, preserving the heritage of our region, communities, and people? This is what we really think. This is our intent. So on a little bit of a lighter note, I'm going to go through some reasons to save seeds. One's curiosity, whatever perks your interest. It's kind of where we all start out. Hey, man, that's a cool seed. Let's check this out. We just tend to we want to do more than what we're capable of or what we need to. So people can get discouraged, but do about 3 or 4 different things, and you'll be better for it. You'll be able to spend the time and have the observation skills to develop those, so you're better in the future. And when it comes to curiosity, it helps fuel your own learning. At least that's one of the reasons I keep farming and saving seeds, is I'll never know it all. And it's constant learning, constant problem solving. And also there's things that, even though we have seeds in the seed banks, we haven't grown out every single variety. So if we happen to pass something along to somebody, there's things that we don't know about it. And there's certain myths traded down through families about certain seeds that may not happen in the field. So to keep an open mind and to look at what's actually happening in the field and recording it is a great thing. It's also great fun. And it'll also help you to go beyond your own perceived limitations. Number 2, another reason to save seeds is love. We want me and Charlotte, it's our philosophy. We want to share our seed with everybody, and those who love them will be the ones to keep them. So they'll be there for everybody. Sometime, somewhere down the road, And but we do bank them as a backup. So if something were to happen, we still have a small amount of seeds that we can draw from, replant, and keep going. We also do bank the stories. We want people to write down as much history as they know from the seed when we get it. And so we also save the stories. Another reason we save seed, which is important, is honoring the people that came before us. How many hands, I mean, we've been breeding food crops for over 10,000 years. How many hands that we don't even know have, these seeds have passed through to be with us today. We've got an edible gourd, kukuzi, gagutska, opo, whatever you want to call it. It's been around for 10,000 years. And it just amazed me that we still have it here today, that people made a commitment to a plant to save seeds from year to year, and it's still here. And that's just truly amazing to me. And another reason why we need to pass all this stuff on. The next one is preservation. Between the consolidation and the loss of biodiversity, loss of diversity in our seeds, the seed companies, the food, the distribution, the usage, and of course, things you all know about like the GMOs, but also the loss of habitat and the loss of good farming practices. Even what people call growing organic, kind of on a small to medium scale. A lot of it isn't. They're still using monocultures, and I'm definitely not fond of plastic culture. But if you want to do 30 acres of vegetables, you're going to have to do something like that. But we really need to get down to, especially saving seeds, down to good farming practices. And with climate change, we've begun doing some dry land farming. And we can go into all those kind of things later. But I want to impress upon you is that we are the antithesis to the big ag. And by saving seeds, you're going to be part of it too, and part of this regional seed bank. So back to the preservation part, the traditional seeds grown in a certain area, they've been adapted and grown in that area for, we have some seeds that's been in our bank, that are in our bank that have been around this local area for 100 years or more. We have a lot of seeds from southern Alabama that have been there for generations and generations. One corn we think was actually a very old native one that it came up via Mexico, and still grown in the area, and is just known as the family corn. There's no name, so Charlotte put a name on it. And another one is citrons, which I got enamored with this year because the slaves brought it over from Africa and planted it in the cotton fields and would break it open to quench their thirst. And I'm sure there's lots of electrolytes in it, but it's the ancestor of the watermelon. And it used to be, we used to candy it here. That's what candied fruit used to be, along with, like candied watermelon rind and stuff. But anyway, so these things have been grown in these local areas for hundreds of years. So they're adapted to our weather, to the bugs and weed pressures. And we have a tomato that has been grown in the same garden for 65 years. And it doesn't heat check. It keeps trucking right along through the biggest heat of the summer. And it's just amazing. We don't even know, that's another one. We don't know where it came from, what the name of it originally was, but it's a big cherry tomato. So, and so places you can look to for some of these seeds are check out the people in your local area, the older people. Charlotte's gotten a lot of them from estate sales because they'll just drag them out of the freezer and nobody knows what they are. And sometimes you can find them online, and then the Seed Savers Exchange. You can find several people listed here. There's Seed Savers from Alabama. And we also really believe in creating more regional seed banks that cooperate with each other and bank seeds for each other to be a further safety valve for, or backup for saving each other's seeds. So we'll always have them here. And we really put our emphasis on regional because of these reasons of adaptability, but also because it's a smaller area, but adapting for climate change is a little bit easier rather than trying to adapt something from Maine. We do, however, have grown things from international seed companies, but we tend to look at them from things that resemble our climate and our environment. So like for lavender, we won't grow something from England. It will be from the Mediterranean region that likes dry roots, but maybe the coastal fog. It does a whole lot better here. It will actually last more than 2 or 3 years, but it's still a challenge. Okay. And then we are on into climate change. This is another thing we think is really imperative. And even though we have seeds that are in the bank that are over 10 years old, I did 16 seed saving things on our oldest seeds. I call it the dead list. Charlotte hates it when I call it that, but that's what it is because they've been in the freezer long enough that they're coming up on becoming extinct. So we've been really trying to get them out there and kind of get them up to date on what the environment is now, but they really need to be grown out every year so they can keep adapting and evolving. And we need other growers for that. We need other people interested. And we would really like people who are interested to, if they grow these out, we give the seeds, but we just ask that they give us some back. And to the climate change, one of the things that we're trying to do, because sun scald on peppers and tomatoes have gotten worse and worse over the years. And if you take a look at commercial tomato varieties and you've seen them fruiting, they look like they're all fruit with hardly any leaves. Well, me and Charlotte are going the other way. We're actually trying to select and develop the tomato plants to have more leaf cover to protect the fruit and peppers. And we've also changed planting, or at least I have, because I'm a market garden. I've, very active in rotations, but we're also planting stuff to where like the peppers can be shaded by the okra. I plant my peppers on the north side of the okra for that reason. Okay. Incorporating to help plants evolve, because it requires human endeavor to help our food crops evolve in this way. It's our communication with them. We need to use and to keep the quality and the taste and the genetic diversity in it well. Use better farming practices like dry land farming, organic practices, and systems, whole systems. There are many tools and tool banks to enhance our environment for the better, not just when we're growing seeds, but overall in the farm. And not only should we be thinking when you're saving seeds, thinking about regions, but also localities, your own microclimate. And if there is not only looking at the like macro weather, but getting to know your land, the heat sinks, the cold spots, the hard pan, disease and weed species that make up the diversity or lack thereof for your beneficials and your plants. All this informs you and directs your communications with the whole. And if there's one thing seed saving will teach you, it will teach you better observation skills, because when you're not on top of the seeds and how they're developing, when they're flowering, and making all these observations, it can lead to mistakes, but also you just won't pick up on them, or all the information is vital for you to write down, especially because you won't remember it all. I think I will, but I never do. And from season to season, it's different. So making a record, and especially on seeds you aren't familiar with, this is a good way of getting to know that plant. And it's something you can go back on year after year, especially, you know, what was the weather like when you planted it? When did it like to bloom? How much water? How good was the fruit? How much did it set? Those kind of things. And there's a couple of handouts that are available at the end of this that you can just download that gives isolation distances and cross-pollination things as well. So that little cultural sheet will be really good for you keeping track of your seeds. I know I kind of touched on a lot of things and went through it a little quick, mostly because I'm nervous, but there's a lot of reasons to save seeds in that. And I really want to excite people to do this. One, me and Charlotte are getting older, and we need somebody else to come in this and really have a passion for it. And we need other people to grow and be involved as the whole, to be all those people out there that love the seeds, that will keep them around. And so we all have access to them. I'm a farmer, so I like to grow a 100-foot row of something, and I want to make sure a farmer has 5 pounds of seeds. And Charlotte, she knows a plant intimately. And so, because I'm a market garden, in the cross-pollination problems, because I want to grow 40 different kinds of, you know, just the things, 10 different kinds of tomatoes. So it means I can only grow one kind of tomato in an isolated spot in order to save true seeds. So I can only do one tomato a year. So that kind of covers, I think, what we think is important. And I wouldn't mind getting into the how-tos. Do any of you want to, is there any questions for this section of it, of just the inspiration and reasons to save seeds, before we get into the more practical how-tos of it?
We had a couple of questions from Franny. So one of them is, what is the status currently about if saving seeds is still being attacked? Can Monsanto still keep people from saving seeds?
Well, yeah, they're still taking people to court over it. But most of that's really, they haven't gotten into the weeds as far as little individual people. There is a farmer in Section, Alabama, who got sued by Monsanto, but he was seed cleaning and doing a lot of it, growing his own soybeans. So it was more related to commodity crops, things they already have patents on, and going after the bigger seed savers, bigger than us. And also that's why we think sharing the seeds widely will help us in that endeavor, that even if one of us goes down, there's still going to be seeds somewhere else. What else?
Deb. And then just one more, I think, before we go into our videos, who will inherit your seeds? If you could just go on a little bit about your project and who will inherit your seeds.
Well, that's a good question. After Charlotte, she's about 15 years older than I am. They'll come to me, and then we don't know from there. We really don't. That excited person, and also we wish to form cooperative ventures with other, I guess you would say, seed companies, because it comes down to two things. Either we're going to bank seeds and keep a small amount of them just to keep the population growing, or we need to be a seed business. And I don't want to take on another business, and there's already people doing seed businesses. So we would rather form a relationship with those. We've had feelers out to Southern Exposure. Nobody's answered up over there. And then I found another farmer who's doing a seed business, and we're going to try cooperating with him this year. It was around sword beans, and I grew a bunch of sword beans, so we're going to try offering seeds through his organization, which is the Experimental Farm. And he collects mostly kind of oddball seeds or experimental seeds. So that's one avenue we're going. But we would really like a little army of growers to develop. And we have also helped start some seed libraries. The only question we have with seed libraries is it's really good for education, and I think they're a wonderful thing. But when it comes to keeping seeds true to type, who's going to be kind of the seed police? And we also don't believe everything should be true to type, but if you're trying to keep ancestral seeds, we really need to. But we have mixed up seeds, bean seeds especially, and it seems like people here really liked the cross-pollinated varieties that put off all kinds of different seeds. They're beautiful, they taste good, it's all good. And we actually have a kind of pride about that. Not many seed savers have pride about crossed up seeds, but we do. Okay, anybody else?
That's great, Dove. Joe asked a question about maintaining genetic diversity when growing small amounts of seeds. I think that'll be incorporated into the how-tos. So just keep kind of going through, then keep the questions in the chat, and I'll keep putting them in our questions document, and then we'll come back after. That sounds
okay.
Good. All right.
And I think this is going to be a video of Charlotte talking.
So we're here with Miss Charlotte. She's invited us into her lovely home. We have Kaylana, our youth council member, here, and we're going to be looking at some of the seeds and beans the self-proclaimed bean lover has to share with us today. So you want to tell us what we have?
Yeah, this is what I call the seed mess. Seed saving can be a messy thing. I bet you can hear better if I take my mask off.
It's your preference.
Well, I'll do it as long as you stay 6 feet back.
Yes, ma'am. We can take.
Okay, so I have a lot of different seeds out, and these are all things, almost all things that I grew out this year.
Okay.
And I've divided them into things that I'm going to save and things I'm going to eat. And generally, the things I'm going to eat are the damaged seeds that either have mold or some insect bit it or whatever. So, a lot of beans because I'm a bean specialist.
What beans you got?
I've got all kinds. I have, and if I can remember where they came from. This is Dr. Wolf's, it's called Alabama Lady.
Ooh.
Dr. Wolf was a seed collector near Knoxville.
Okay.
I don't even know what kind of doctor. And I got his seed through the Seed Savers Exchange.
Wow.
And kept it for years and years. And I had gotten it as a reference because I had some seeds I couldn't identify. And I thought, well, I'll order things that sound similar and see if that's the same thing I have.
Okay.
But I had never grown it out. And this year I thought I should grow it out. So I grew it out, and it was not a good year this year for harvesting good seed.
Why come?
Just as the seeds became ripe for picking, it turned rainy or hot. And that leads to mold and mildew. Bad seed.
Uh-oh.
I mean, some of them might be usable, but I'll have to go through them, and we'll do that, because I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about beans. And the beans will include garden beans, pole beans, bush beans, all of those, plus cowpeas
Okay.
and limas.
Awesome.
And there'll be some other exotics thrown in, but that's mainly what I have.
Okay. Wow.
So the proportion, I mean, one of my rules that I've had to establish for myself is that if I don't label the seed when I pick it, later on I can't keep it. I'm not sure what it is after a while. You know, particularly with things like tomato seeds, all look alike.
Yeah, that's true.
And we probably have in the collection as many as 10 different black pole beans.
Wow.
From different people in different places. And so if I don't label them right away, that'd be one of my rules. So this year, these are beans to eat. These are Dr. Wolf's beans that are already dried. These are ones that are still drying. And this larger amount here is bad seed that we get to eat. It's been a rough year for bean seeds. So this is just an old one that
Why was it a bad year for bean seeds?
it was a bad year for bean seeds because right as they were ready to be harvested, the weather turned exceptionally hot, and then we got a hurricane, and we got all this water coming in. And if they're, let me find one. These guys. If these were still green, it would not be so much of a problem that we have hot, humid weather. But as they start to dry, and particularly as they get paper dry, when they're wet, mold and mildew from the outside can penetrate and go onto the beans. So that's what happened this year. So there's piles of these, what I call bad beans. They're good for teaching.
Good for eating.
Good for eating. This is a black bean. It's going to be problematical because black beans don't show the damage.
That's what I was going to ask.
White beans, like this was a really good year for the limas. The white limas, if that year it was dry at the time I was picking them, and there was very little damage.
I see.
Now, if I had grown them this year, I wouldn't be able to keep more than a third of them for
Wow.
seed purposes. Yeah, and we also had this year a particularly fine year for green stink bugs.
Yep. I know that.
And I think they like to do bad things to my beans. So, I have other things, I can't limit myself to what I should be saving. A friend brought me these, and these are just commercial popcorn.
Mm.
And I don't know if I'm gonna save them or not. I might give them to somebody that wants to learn how to grow popcorn
Mm.
and see how that turns out.
Okay.
These are the rare seeds of camellias.
Ooh.
We have a giant camellia on the front that's probably about 100 years old, and it's a single camellia, and it makes lots of seed.
Wow.
And I gather them every year, and some years I get around to planting them, some years I don't. And some years they fall on the ground under the mother tree and they sprout all on their own. So
No.
I've got tons of those.
Do you have to do anything special to save them?
Yes, and I haven't done it. What you should do is catch them as they drop from the pods and put them directly in water and soak them for a couple of days, and then either plant them directly, and this would be in August when this happens, plant them directly where you want them, or you can put them in moist peat moss in a Ziploc bag, label them, and put them in the refrigerator till spring.
Okay. Awesome.
So either one, I didn't do either of those, so we'll see. They'll get planted directly, and we'll hope for the best. This is green leaf fennel.
Mm.
It doesn't make big bulbs like the stuff you see on cooking shows. It makes a tiny little bulb early in the spring, but lots of tall leafy stalks, and the pollinators love it. And Dove and I grow some things just for the pollinators.
What else?
In my garden, the big ones, I have a mountain mint,
Love it.
which is fabulous. Of course, sunflowers. Have you been out back?
No?
Oh,
Maybe.
You'll have to go out. This is like, my husband has said this for years. About this time of year, he'll look at the garden, it's all weedy and overtaken by morning glories. Well, this is overtaken by red morning glories. And he'll always say, there's nothing wrong with this garden that a good frost won't cure. So I tell myself that. It's important.
I've never seen the red ones before.
Oh my gosh. They are wonderful for butterflies and hummingbirds.
How delightful.
A lot of beans, more beans. This is, check before I say this. This is what the bean pod for this one looks like.
Okay, wow.
And I have taken to harvesting them before they turn papery. And it's tricky because if you harvest them when they're just green, the seeds may not mature. And so what I do is I wait until they start to turn color.
Okay.
More like this. This one will turn kind of a yellow color before it goes brown. And then usually still soft. Yeah, it's still soft. And this part of the bean, is there a name for this? I'm sure there's a name. This would be where the stem attaches to the vine.
Okay.
And so this is just the top part of the bean pod. And once it becomes soft enough to bend easily, you can pick them for seed if you have to. It'd be better if it were a perfect late summer, early fall. It would be wonderful to let them dry on the vine, because that's the best thing. But here in the southeast, it's not usually practical.
Why not?
Oh, well, because of all of this business that happens with the mildew and the mold.
Well, and then sandwiched in between two hurricanes, my lima beans managed to hit in between. They were just starting to turn when the first hurricane came through, so I didn't pick them. Then I waited in between the two of them, and it dried out. We had, dry weather for like a week, 2 weeks. Then I picked that set, another one came through, and then they put off more dry ones, and I let them dry out, and then I picked those. But, if we would have had them, pretty back to back with no really dry weather in between, I probably would have lost all of them.
Goodness. Ooh.
It's been a difficult year for things that ripened at just particular time.
Is there any way to save them once they get the mildew? Anything you can do?
Well, all I know to do is go through the pods and look for damage, and if there's not damage, I would even put them in a different jar and say, there may be mildew. I don't know what mildew does. I think if it's on the seed, then it carries with the plant when you plant it next year.
Ooh.
And it'll be in your soil then.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it'll be there for at least 5 years, 5 to 7 years.
Don't want that.
I'm a self-taught gardener, and Dove is a farmer.
Mm.
We have different points of view
Mm.
and different knowledge.
Wow.
And so I think it really works well that we're able to work together on this, because we get a synergy in this.
I don't know if you could hear all of that or not, but I'm going to go through the how-tos, and I just wanted to start with just some things you need to keep in mind before we get down to the actual processes. One, your inspiration is going to inform your choice of crops and where you decide to head with all this. Be mindful of your individual site, how much room you have, and especially be conscious of your neighbors, especially if you're in town, about cross-pollination. And all our varieties are open pollinated heirloom varieties. So you really have to take a look at your neighbors, see who's planting what. It depends on what kind of pollination the specific crop is doing. Wind pollinated crops, of course, you need, up to about 3 miles. That would be okra, corn, beets, chard. And we have information on specific crops in one of our little handouts. And then you have those pollinated by insects, and then some that are self-fertile, like the beans and lima beans. So you can plant like a green bean, pretty close to a lima bean, pretty close to a summer pea, and they won't cross up. And tomatoes, there's a lot of controversy, but they will cross up. And the older potato leaf varieties are really promiscuous. And the controversy comes to where the old varieties, the stamen extends past the blossom. And the more modern varieties, the tomato leaf varieties, don't come out too far. So that's one reason why the older ones are probably a little bit more promiscuous. But on our farm, we keep them anywhere from 600 to 1,000 feet away from each other for me to get true to type seeds. And that's more of a commercial distance. Home gardeners, I think they have the distance around 350 feet or so. I just edge on caution because it can take some time to unwind it. And just like I can only grow one squash in the machada family every year, because of course they'll cross with other machadas like butternut and stuff. Those in the pepo family, like zucchini, I don't even grow a pepo because I grow all the zucchinis. Some of what they advertise as gourds are actually a pepo squash. And some of the pumpkins, some of those are like one of the white varieties of pumpkin is actually a machada, and there's another white one that's actually a pepo. Sometimes you have to contact the seed company to find out for sure, because even in the seed catalogs, sometimes they don't always list that kind of stuff. And for me, I live way out in the country. Our property, I have 3 isolation spots. I have the ability to have a large amount of distance. But we also have the problem, we have commercial corn and soybeans about a mile away. And so there's other strategies you can employ, like wheat plant, because the corns, the more modern corns have been developed to go into colder, wetter soil. So the older open pollinated varieties like warmer soil. So I just plant them a month later than the earlier corns and the commercial corns, because then they won't be tasseling at the same time. So you can kind of do some staggered planting with that kind of thing. And then another thing to be conscious of is you also need a minimum population. Most kind of a rule of thumb is 20 to 30 surviving healthy plants. You may plant 50 and get 30. That's kind of a rule of thumb, but things like corn take 200 to 300 seeds, and you should plant them in a block and harvest from the middle. Don't plant them in rows, because that way you get a good pollen coverage over the ears if you plant them in a block formation. Again, in our handout, we supply some of that information. And I believe gardeners are in a good position to do a lot of the seed saving. But it's kind of iffy. Gardeners can devote more time and energy to, like a single plant. Me as a market farmer, sometimes when I need to be at market or I'm picking stuff or we're processing stuff, I don't have time to pick maybe the beans before it rains when I need to. So I run that risk of my bean crop getting all moldy before I can get a chance to get to it. And they're also a lot better at selecting for the same reasons. I don't necessarily have the time to be observant as I should. But we can grow a large quantity and a large variety of things. You need to be conscious also to how much time you have to devote to seed saving and being observant. And start out with a few things. Don't go hog wild. Me and Charlotte are well past that point. We're just completely obsessed. But we have given thoughts to cutting down, how do you say, the members in each species maybe that we take on every year, and kind of devoting some time to a certain number of species and being very particular about their development so we can help things adapt to climate change. And then what kind of storage do you have? You need to have good storage where you refrigerate. Most our stuff, we freeze some of it, but when it comes to storage, we use canning jars with lids. And with all of this stuff, by our own mistakes, you need to label everything, because once you get tomatoes laid out, and maybe you have 2-3 different varieties of tomatoes, you will never remember which tomatoes those are. So label, label, label. And we do put small amounts of seeds in little plastic bags, but put them in a glass jar. But we don't like plastic bags because they're porous to humidity. So we always use glass. But when you're drying these things out, and I'll get to it in a little bit, but to put them in the fridge, they need to be down to 10-12% humidity, moisture. And if you're going to freeze them, they need to be lower than that, because any water left in those seeds it'll bust the embryo when you go to freeze it. So there's 4, but we're going to talk about 3 methods of processing. Or, well, wait a minute, let me go back. So this will be kind of as you're going through the season with the plant. So you've planted, making sure you have a proper population size to ensure a good genetic diversity in your crop. Like I said, most plants need 20 to 30 surviving plants. And you've isolated so that they can stay true to type. In other words, the plant you planted will be the plant that will come up from the seeds you just saved from it. Meaning they haven't cross-pollinated with anything else. So you're doing your observations, the weather, what they like when you planted them, the vigor of the plant, any diseases or insect problems, and actions you've taken. And maybe you're selecting something. Maybe you want to select more leaf cover or bigger pods or bigger seeds or the color of seeds. We probably have 10 different varieties of the Trail of Tear beans in the seed bank, but different families have given them to us. So we have, and so through the years, they have selected their own variety of beans. And so we save them that way. This is so-and-so's family of the Cherokee Trail of Tears bean. But so we have everything from a totally black seeded variety of these beans to a mixed up black and white to totally white seeded variety of the same plant. So, so if you're choosing for flavor, or if you like a certain color, you like, one year I had tomatoes cross up in the field and our customers love them. And they were yellow with a beautiful red sunburst on the bottom, great tasting tomatoes. And everybody wanted them next year, but I couldn't give them to them because they were crossed up. And that was, so it's like, no, you guys can't have these ever again because it was a mishap in the field. So that happens. So, so you've planted them, you got fruit starting to come off and you're looking at them. So you need to choose the best looking fruits from the healthiest plants. And usually, especially with beans, those are usually the ones that they first develop at the bottom of the plant. Same with okra, tomatoes. But that's not to say ones later on in the season aren't as good. These just are usually the bigger and the most healthiest of the fruits during the season. And then we usually either tie a ribbon around them or a string, or just say, don't pick anything on the bottom of this plant, wait till they grow out and you can have, the top tomatoes to sell at market or whatever, or eat. And so and I know Charlotte's had this problem, but you have others who come into the field, say, man, that's the best looking tomato, and they just take it. I can't blame them too much for that. You've got them all selected and you want to harvest. And I don't know if you could hear part of what Charlotte was saying about beans. Because we live in a hot, humid area, mold will develop on the beans in the pod, even though they're still on the plant. So things, especially that form pods, like not just beans, but collards, anything in the brassicas family, it's really good if you can let them dry on the plant. But if rain's coming and you need to get these picked before they're completely dry, with beans, Charlotte was saying, really when they turn leathery, they're not quite dry, crackling dry, but when they're kind of leathery feeling and where the stem meets the top of the pod and it's really flexible, you can bring them in and you can shell them and lay them out on a plate or a tray and dry them. But if you're harvesting them much sooner than that, your beans won't be mature enough. Right now, I got that problem going on with the sword beans. I've had to, because we've gotten frost, I've had to just collect what I can, put them in the greenhouse, let them dry out and see what I got. But, okay, I think we're ready to go on to the processing methods. We have fermenting, wet processing, dry processing, and there's another type dealing with tubers, which we won't go into today because that can be a little involved and a little tricky sometimes. But I think we're starting with, aren't we starting with wet processing first?
Yeah, so we're starting with wet processing first, and I want to also be mindful of time. I'm wondering if I could just play through all three, and then we can open it up for questions.
Okay,
after.
that's fine.
Okay.
This is a Choctaw sweet potato squash.
Very vibrant.
Yeah. You can take this home to eat if you want.
It's very similar. Looks very similar to spaghetti squash.
Yeah, or it's in the butternut family. This is in the machata family with butternut and a lot of other winter squashes, big and little. This is a little bit more stringy than most machatas,
Yeah.
but the native people grew machatas a lot because they're usually good keepers. These aren't particularly this year, but I think it's because we've had so much rain. A lot of those out there have just rotted. But it's also because squashes in the machata family, and there's some pumpkins in the machata family. I mean, pumpkins are just a squash. Are the least favorite food of the vine borers. Their first favorite food is maximas, which like it a little further north. But there are ones like buttercup, Hubbards, those kind of squashes.
Yeah.
Squash, vine borers and stink bugs like those first. And then there's mixta, which is like the cushaws, and the peppos, which is like all your summer squash and like acorn squash. And then these are last. So, and you can just take these like this and let them, sometimes I just take the whole thing and let it kind of break down, but there's a word, I can't remember what it's called, but the longer you let these sit and kind of let which is what I do, I usually let them sit for a while and let them kind of decompose, not really rot, but get really soft.
Mm-hmm.
And that means the seeds are really kind of fermenting in
Yeah.
the cavity. So that's what all these seeds need to have done to them, is even the squashes, even these melons a little bit, need to be fermented kind of in their own juices or sit around for a while and then harvested, and that increases the germination rate. There's a word for that. It escapes me right now. But if you take these and just rinse them off so you get some of the pulp off of them, and then just lay them out on a plate. Always remember, lay them out on glass or hard plastic, because if you put them on paper towels, especially things like tomatoes, small seeds, it'll stick to them. So you end up with everything stuck to a paper towel.
I made that mistake once, actually.
Yeah, you'd think that would be a good thing.
Just regrowing tomatoes out of the kitchen
Oh yeah.
we bought.
And that's something too, is the gelatin. Just kind of squeeze the pulp in there. Try to get as much of the seeds in there as you can.
How long do you let these ferment?
Until they all it gets a white scum on top and starts smelling really bad. Until it's really yucky and everybody wants them out of the house. But when they get that white scum on top of them, they've fermented long enough, and I just put a little bit of water in it and let the good seeds settle down at the bottom, then I can pour everything off the top.
Makes sense.
And then they always usually need to be rinsed a couple times because they still have some of the pulp on them. And so I'll let this sit around in its own juices. Sometimes if it's really dry pulp, sometimes these cherry tomatoes don't have a lot of juice in them. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of water.
Yeah.
And then we'll just let that sit around. I'll probably add a little bit of water to it, but definitely don't ever use city water, because chlorine will actually help things to sprout.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like if you have flower seeds that are kind of temperamental, or ones that need to be scarified or processed in some way before you can use them, if you want to kind of like pre-sprout them, just use like a teaspoon of bleach to like a gallon of water or something. It's a really dilute, and then just soak them in that and they'll pre-sprout.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
And also that's also why you don't want them in the seeds you're trying to save. So either
So they'll make it till next
distill-
year before they sprout.
right.
So
Well, these were, and Charlotte's very right. You know, any misshapen ones or any ones that have a stink bug, see them little dots like that?
yeah.
That's where a stink bug is sticking his little proboscis in there. And they actually inject, I don't know if it's exactly a pathogen, but it causes kind of a necrosis of tissue. And in tomatoes, it can make it taste bad. Like at the end of the year, you get all those stink bugs in tomatoes. Right where they have that little injection point, they get. See, here's some badly shaped. Right there's an injection point, and you can see they're kind of wrinkled and discolored in different ways.
Yeah.
Those are bad. We don't want to use those. And for some reason, well, lima beans are actually starting to form when the end of the tomato plants are coming. So they're like the last of the food stuffs for the food crops for the stink bugs. So a lot of times they'll just congregate over there. They have a hard time getting good ones sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, Deb, I'm going to stop it there so that we have a couple of minutes for some questions before we close out. Several folks are wondering about humidity. Wondering if you could talk to how do we know, especially at home, home use, when a seed has reached 10% humidity or lower? Oh, and sorry, you're on mute, Dev. Sorry.
A good rule of thumb is if you have an air-conditioned room, that'll really help dry them out well. A good rule of thumb is put your seeds in a jar and seal it up when you think they're about dry enough. Seal it up overnight, and if there's condensation in the morning in that jar, they're still too wet, so dry them out some more. That's just a good rule of thumb. And also, you can buy instruments to help you determine that. But I think the cheapest one was like $150. But anyway, that's a good rule of thumb to keep them dry enough, and just don't freeze them. And especially if you put them in the fridge, I mean, do put them in the fridge. That way they don't have any sunlight, no moisture, so they won't be tempted to start sprouting again. And that's about it.
Wonderful. I was wondering if you could also talk about city water, about not using city water.
Yeah, chlorinated water will help sprout your seeds. And the reason seeds need to be fermented is like the gelatin around tomatoes and such actually have growth inhibitors in them. And so that's why you ferment them, is to nullify those effects, because that's what keeps seeds from sprouting when it's not an optimum time for them. So basically you're taking that layer of protection off of them, but chlorinated water is actually it actually helps things to sprout. So you can, especially flower seeds and other hard to sprout seeds you might have, you can put them in a weak solution of bleach water and actually pre-sprout them. But otherwise, you don't want to use chlorinated water when you're trying to save seeds. Okay.
Okay, and just one more before we close. I know we're cutting it close, y'all. And thanks so much, Dove. Franny has some heirloom okra, and it's still outside the pods, and outside in pods, and it froze last week. Can she still save the okra? It looked dry, but it warmed up during the day, and it warmed up during the day.
Yeah, probably if they were really dry. But we've had some rains, so you've gotten mold in there. I would say what I would do is I would go ahead and harvest some and then put them in a wet paper towel and see what kind of germination rate you're getting on them. And that way you won't waste a lot of time harvesting all this stuff and saving seeds and not have good germination on them. And kind of take a sample of between, 4 or 5 different plants. And that way you get a good sampling of your whole patch.
Great, thanks so much. All right, y'all. So that was all the time that we had for questions. and we're going to wrap up our time together. I just want to encourage everybody to become ASAN members, to donate to ASAN. We're just so grateful to be here today, and just a big thank you to Dove and to Charlotte, who worked on this as well and couldn't join us, but just sending love to her as well. I noticed that the Google Drive link that I sent out, it only goes to one PDF. I'm going to correct that. Now, if you just stay on a little bit longer, I'll put the proper link in the chat. I'm going to put some information about becoming an ASAN member in the chat as well. And I also have a little poll for y'all to fill out about this workshop. And just a really big round of applause to Dove, and just show your love for her in the chat, please. Thank you so, so much, Dove.
Thank you, and I appreciate everybody being here and being patient through my long-windedness and nervousness, so thank you.